So now after this deep dive, let's use our newly gained knowledge to improve this overall layout. One thing I will do, for example, is work on this app container padding. This actually doesn't use any of the new knowledge, but I need to do this to make this look a bit prettier. I basically just want to have a padding to the top of 50, and then I want to have a padding horizontal, so left and right, of 16. So not of 50, but of 16. With that, I'd say this generally looks better, though we can see that this padding is kind of ignored and our button here is going off the screen. This can be fixed by decreasing the amount of width our text input has to 70% maybe. Now this looks better. What doesn't look better though is where this text is in this button. This is something we can improve with align items on the input container though. At the moment the problem is that basically this button is stretched to be as high as this text input. And the text is then not centered in the button because the button doesn't have any styles that would center the text. Now you could think that maybe we can add some styling to the button, but it turns out that the button is a component that doesn't have a style prop. It might look like it has because I'm getting some autocompletion here, but that's actually only some autocompletion I get here because I typed the word style before in this code file. The proper autocompletion that tells me that a certain prop is supported looks like this, with this kind of icon next to it. So the button doesn't have a style prop because indeed it doesn't support styling. You can always check out the official docs and dive into an element there to see which props it supports. And for example, on the button there is no style prop, whereas on the view, for example, you do find a style prop. But that's just a side note. That's why we have to fix it differently, and we can fix it by not stretching this button. That would be one way of achieving this. So we can set align items here on input container and set this to center instead of stretch. With that, the button is now centered and looks better. We could also build our own button, but that is something you will learn later. So now this looks better. I also want to change how much space this input area takes up though, and how much space the list of goals takes up. To achieve this, I'll do a couple of things. For example, I want to add some padding to the bottom on this input container of, let's say, 24. So that there is some space between the view that holds the text input and the button, and the view that will hold the list of goals later. You can see that spacing here now. We also could add a little border here. So we could add a border to the bottom and give it a width by setting border bottom width of 1. And then adding a border to the bottom and giving it a color of, let's say, maybe this gray again. But of course you can pick any color you want. Now we got this border, and below that the list of goals. But now I want to make sure that my text input area takes up 1/4, so a quarter of the overall available height. And this can be done with the flex property, as you learned. We can set this to 1 and then add a styling object to this view that holds the list of goals that takes up 3/4 of the available space, which can be achieved by adding flex 3 to this view. So therefore I'll add another styling object in my style sheet here and name it the goals container. And here I'll set flex 3. As you learned, all the flex values are added together as long as the containers to which they are added are siblings to each other and are part of the same surrounding parent element, which is the case for these two views. And then the space is distributed accordingly. So 1 plus 3 is 4, and therefore this takes 1/4, and this will take 3/4. We just have to add this here, so I will add a style prop to this view and set this equal to styles goals container. With that, it will look horrible. And the reason for this is that we also need to work on the outer container now, the container that holds these two containers on which we just set the flex properties. This outer container needs to take up the entire height of the app so that the inner containers can then distribute this space. By default, without adding the flex property, this container will only take as much space as it needs, and that's only defined by the space the content in the container takes up. But now that we're setting flex on those containers in the container, this doesn't work anymore. And to fix this, we need to force this container to take all the available height, and we do this by simply adding flex1 to the app container, so that the outer container takes all the height, because it's the only container here, so flex1 will give it all the space, and then the inner containers can divide that available space. So by adding flex1 to the app container and saving this, this now looks better, and now this is a quarter, and that here are 3/4. Now if I look at it like this still doesn't look perfect, so what we might want to do is actually give that list here 4/5 of the available space, so that goals container will get 4 and the input container stays at 1. And instead of setting a padding bottom, I will set a margin bottom here on the input container. And with that looks better. We could maybe even go to flex 5 down there and leave it like this. Feel free to experiment with this and choose your own values. But this will work for me, and this is now Flexbox in action to achieve a first basic layout. Of course, this is not the final layout we will have though.